Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Debating for America's Youth. Today, I am interviewing a spectacular guest who is Cory Wurtenberger, who is the current point leader for informative speaking and original oratory. Welcome, Cory.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, just to get started, how did you get started in speech and debate? How did you hear about it, and what made you want to stick with doing speech and debate?
So as for what got me into it, it's a pretty, I would say, generic story where my brother did it. He loved it for 2 years, so me coming into high school, it was only natural for me to try it out. But what really drew me to the activity was the competitive aspect of it. I was always a very competitive person, and going into high school, I wanted to find an avenue to continue doing so. I just didn't know what that was. So my brother did speech. I tried it out, and I loved it. And oratory, as for why I started with oratory as opposed to any other event, my old captain, Noah Rabinovich, sold me on it, and then the next 4 years, I just loved it every time I did it even more.
Definitely. And so, when you started to do these oratory events, what kind of pieces did you end up using to tell your story? Like, what topics did you end up speaking about?
So the way I do oratory is a little bit unique, whereas they usually don't have very specific, I guess, extensions into my own life. I kind of just choose what I think is important to talk about at the moment. So as a freshman, my first topics were, I think, money for info, and for oratory, it was think before you speak. Just very generic stuff to try to introduce me into the activity. But in terms of actually showing my story and actually talking about what I want to talk about, I wouldn't say I really got into that until about junior year, where my oratory was about, I was going through the college application, and you know how the second half of junior year is so crazy, so is first semester of senior year. So my oratory was about the importance of being specialized as opposed to well-rounded, because the obvious thing is colleges want the kid who's the valedictorian and star soccer player who also is the debate captain, and I was like, that's infeasible, and I was realizing that as I was applying to college, it was driving me crazy. So I would say that is the most direct example of me inserting myself into a topic.
Definitely. In terms of your topic, I completely agree. I think that as I went through the college application process, I was like, you can't correctly fill 10 activities into the activity section without looking spread out. Like, you can't do 10 perfect activities
But you
and
feel so
still
insecure about having 8 activities when the next person has 10. It's it's paradox.
Exactly. And so you've done speaking at numerous levels. How do you get over nerves? Did you have nerves going in, and now when you speak, do you have nerves? And if so, how do you get over them?
So going into my freshman year, I had a very noticeable speech impediment where I couldn't really say my R's whatsoever. It still kind of lingers in certain words, but for the most part, it's gone. But I was never overly self-conscious about it. It was just something I was trying to work on. And in terms of the nerves, of course you're nervous at your first tournament. It's just terrifying. But the way I got over it was you go to more tournaments. For example, we have our novice state tournament at the end of freshman year. And I was in quarterfinals. Terrified. Couldn't, I was shaking as I was walking up. And then, this year, in any break round, I'm not nervous at all for the sole reason of, not because I think I'm going to do better, not because I feel so much more confident per se, just more so, I've been here before. I know what I'm doing is the same thing I've done a million times. So I'm just going to go do it. The experience is the only real answer I have to that question. It's not like I followed, 5 simple tricks.
Definitely. And then after, in addition to the practicing, going to the tournaments, what other practice do you do to get better at your speech and also just speaking in general?
So at first, my in order to get better at my delivery of both my oratory and info, I just had a lot of sessions with my coaches. I'm very lucky to go to Cypress Bay, where, I mean, we have the best coaches out there. I'm sure most people think that about their coaches, but I really do. I went to CBI, ISD, worked with Maggie Woodward, who's best oratory coach I've ever seen. And so in terms of the delivery, I would just have sessions and kind of perform in the mirror, record myself, maybe even record myself in a break round to kind of be able to see for myself how good I was doing and what I can fix. And then for actual writing, I just try to surround myself by people who are better writers than me, frankly, and honestly, more intellectual thinkers than me, so they could poke all the holes in whatever I've written, and then from there I could just kind of workshop it and make it better and better.
Definitely, yeah. I think that giving the practice over and over, especially in front of the mirror and stuff like that, I found it worked really well for me. So in informative speaking, how do you use your props and yeah, like how do you use your props? What do you use for them, and like how do you work them into your speech?
Visual aids and info, especially in high school, are so bizarre, the role they have in the event. The way I view visual aids are they're strictly supposed to supplement your speech. If you have a point that a visual aid will help further the point, use it, fantastic. But the role they've kind of picked up in high school is if you don't have visual aids, you come off as unprepared. Just because the event, I wouldn't say is underdeveloped, but it's early in its development, right? It's the newest event added. So right now, the way I use visual aids, I try to use them only when necessary, and when they are necessary, it's amazing. It helps a lot. But you kind of do have to conform to maybe, I don't know, the meta of info at this point, where, I mean, if you go to California, which, much closer to you than me, their visual aids are insane. They have strings that like drop air. They have all these crazy ideas, and it's awesome to watch. But if you compare that to a Minnesota info or a Florida info, it's incomparable. So in terms of like what is the use of VAs in info, I don't think there is an answer right now. How do I use them? Only when I need them, because ultimately I want my speech to be the focus as opposed to what's happening behind me.
Definitely. Yeah, that's when I was talking to Jordan Allen, the 2019 NSDA National Champion in Info. She was saying the same thing about like how info is so new, so it's kind of like which way is it really going to go? And I would also agree with you about the speech. At the end of the day, the props are really cool, and I've seen some amazing ones. I think it's really if your speech is not developed, we're at a speech event. So I think that should be the key. And then, like you said, it should supplement what you're saying in your speech.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense that me and Jordan have like similar perspectives because we're both from the same district. Personally, I can say that I've had so many rhymes with Jordan Allen and just getting my ego destroyed by seeing how good she was, and almost I've shaped my style because our styles are very different. But in terms of our like philosophies with info, a lot of what I think about the event is because I've seen her do it that way. And I think that's ultimately what's going to happen when you're a Jordan Allen who wins Nats. Everyone's going to watch the video and say, I want to be like her. And I think that's great for the event considering, how amazing she is, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I would say that early on in my career in debate, I watched this this girl in our district. I didn't know how good she was until later on, until I realized she got fourth at nationals. But I would just watch her give her speeches over and over and over in Congress, which is the event I do. And I started to pick up on her, the way, like her style, the way she talked, the way she asked questions. And I started to kind of adapt it to my own style because I didn't have a lot of people in Congress to look up to. And so I think that finding people in your district who are better than you and learning from them is a really smart way to do it.
For sure.
So, what advice would you give a novice who is just getting started in informative or even in original oratory?
I think because you have this whole idea about like speech and debate as a novice. When you're a novice PFer, you're going against other novice PFers, and you have a real chance of gaining a lot of success. As a freshman in oratory info, if you are having competitive success as a freshman, you are the outlier, right? Because you're going against people who've been doing it 2, 3, 4, even more years if they did it in middle school. So the best advice I would give is write a speech that is true to yourself. It's a style that you think you can improve and you think is representative of you as a person you enjoy actually presenting. And then stick with it. Because I'll tell you what, until about Glenbrooks my sophomore year, I was just getting beaten down at every tournament. But you could still sense you're getting beaten down less every tournament, and then eventually you started improving, and it's so much more rewarding than anything else I've ever done, because the improvement is so tangible, right? Not necessarily through like tournament results, but you definitely gain the sense of, even if you don't know if you're necessarily getting better in a tournament setting, you are definitely getting better as a speaker, and it's very obvious. Just stick with it, that's basically it.
Definitely. This might be a dumb question, but do you use the same topic for your OO as you do for your info piece?
No, I don't. I think technically you're allowed to. It's just a really bad look. It just comes off as extremely lazy, and especially now with how they've revised the oratory info rules, now they're talking about how oratories have to be inherently persuasive. Like, that's written into the rules. And informative has to not be persuasive whatsoever, because then it would be an oratory. So if you are using the same speech for both, it's not going to work very well as either an oratory or an info, and it's going to be frowned upon by, people who end up seeing both speeches.
Makes sense. I think that that's a very good distinction, to have one be more informative in nature, obviously, and one be more persuasive. What is some advice you wish you knew going into speech debate? This might, I mean, if it's different than what you would tell a novice. If not, it's okay.
The advice I would give is to not, speech is, I can say this confidently, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. It's really been, because of course high school is high school, but it's been my last 4 years doing speech. And the advice I would give is enjoy it to the fullest, but don't get sucked up in it, if that makes any sense. I see so many people, and this was totally me and might still be me, who are like on tab room 24/7 and then talking about what happened at GMU, even though you didn't go to like all these. Embrace the wonderful parts of speech, and there's so many. As for the, highly competitiveness, I also think that's an amazing part of speech, but don't feed into the toxicity, because it's really easy to get sucked up in that. And kind of being able to realize that and like growing from it, I've been able to appreciate the activity so much more since.
Yeah, definitely. Looking back at my last 4 years, I think that I was trying to chase the trophy a lot, like trying to win the next accomplishment.
Yeah.
And I wish now I kind of would have stepped back and just enjoyed the activity more for what it is, because now that we're in the whole quarantine thing, I really miss the parts of speech and debate I no longer have.
Also, I think you'll notice when you're able to make that healthy shift in mentality, you're going to do better tournament-wise. It's a lot easier going into a tournament trying to speak your best as opposed to get to semis. So it's kind of like this reverse. You kind of have to trick yourself that you don't care in a way, and then you're going to do better as a result. Because if you go in thinking, I need to get through quarters, psychologically, there's a good chance you're going to drop in quarters just because of how you're thinking. So the second you're able to and I'm certainly guilty of, I definitely have expectations and I get upset when I don't do well and whatnot, but I think you just need to have that additional bit of perspective of that's not what this activity is for, and even if it's an amazing part of it, I'm here to give my speech and I'm going to do the best job I can.
Definitely. And then in conclusion, I know you've already talked a lot about the different stuff, and this is not anything new. We can just you don't have to answer. But in conclusion, what would you like to tell the speech and debate community? You've been a huge member for 4 years. Is there anything you would like to say to the community as a whole?
I don't know necessarily to the community as a whole, because I don't know if I'm exactly perfectly ingratiated into the community as a whole, but I do feel very in the midst of the Oratory Info squad. And what I would say is, I don't think conformity in Oratory Info is the path forward. I think we see a lot of people who do extremely well at nationals, and then everyone else kind of follows them the next year, and the trend is extremely simple to follow. I think especially for oratory, where it's kind of, you see a lot of cookie cutter oratories, and that's not degrading because they're cookie cutter for a reason, because that style works. Don't be afraid to step outside of that realm. I think I attribute most of my success to the fact that my style is extremely unique and different. I try a lot for humor. I try a lot to have fun when I'm speaking. And even if that isn't objectively better than style X or style Y, I think it sets me apart. So I think ultimately, if the entire oratory community was able to embrace that and do what they think is true to them, and if what is true to them is that, I don't want to say generic because that's degrading, but that type of style, fantastic. If not, do what you do and you're going to get ballots saying if it works or doesn't. So basically, be yourself in oratory, so oratory as a whole can become much more fluid and much more interesting to watch and participate in.
Definitely. That sounds like some great advice to the oratory community. Well, thank you so much, Cory, for coming on and sharing some of your advice.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So you're good to stop your recording.